Bonsoir, mes amis. I hope you're having a very good Wednesday today. I am having a pretty good Wednesday. I am wising up, getting smarter, learning about Hemingway. You guys, I'm becoming obsessed with Hemingway. I began reading a little bit of his stuff, and the way Hemingway works is as if you are hanging on each sentence and you are hoping for an explanation and it never comes. Hemingway completely messed up. Absolutely. What about his writing? Oh, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that. And you are so right. You are so right. I don't know. I don't know. He is so messed up. His writing, mm, his writing, I'm not sure. Awesome. Awesome. I'm so excited, you guys. So, welcome. Let's get into it and let's start with the material. I'm just going to show you another just quick book picture visual of Hemingway, or at least with the current one I'm reading, because there's so many different versions, but it's fascinating. It is fascinating. Let me begin by going into reading mode. I know, it's crazy. It's so super duper crazy. Alrighty, you guys. There's so much to do. As you can see, the title for today is Love, War, and Hemingway. All is fair in love and war. All is fair in love and war. That love of words and his own attempts to express himself finally blossomed during Ernest's last few years at Oak Park High School. His appointment as editor of Trapeze, the school newspaper, coincided with the appearance of his first 3 short stories in the papers of Tabula, Oak Park High's magazine. Although necessarily juvenile, they displayed precocious confidence and a heavy debt to tales by Jackson London, Rudyard Kipling, and O. Henry, increasingly influential elements to Hemingway's ferocious reading habits. Kipling was to remain a lifelong sole companion, as his poems and stories were a continuous source of inspiration to Hemingway, who would also read them to his sons as they grew up. Influential, too, was a Chicago Tribune sports writer, Ring Lardner. It was his snappy colloquial style which Hemingway and his cohorts copied to give Trapeze a distinctive voice. By now, Hemingway had adopted the nickname Hemmenstein, an early example of the many alternatives he preferred to the more soppy Ernest. Editing Trapeze fixed Hemingway's ambitions firmly on a career in journalism, despite his parents' often stated wishes that, like his father, he attended Oberlin College and study medicine. His dream of joining the growing number of Americans who were volunteering for the action in the World War that had begun raging since 1914, but which the United States had not entered until April 1917, was effectively vetoed by Ed's opinion that he was too young. Instead, Hemingway found himself headed for Kansas City in a trainee reporter's job with that city's illustrious newspaper, The Star, thanks largely to a friendship his uncle Tyler Hemingway shared with its chief editorial writer, Henry Haskell. It was in October 1917 that Ernest Hemingway was seen off by his father in a faintly embarrassing and emotional railway station scene. He would use to great effect in For Whom the Bell Tolls, when Robert Jordan's own memories of his home leaving and his father's moist eyes made him feel suddenly so much older than his father and feel sorry for him that he could hardly bear it. As his train headed southwest towards Kansas City, Ernest Hemingway was embarked on what would prove far more than a first break with the stuffy, claustrophobic atmosphere of Oak Park, and an introduction to the lurly-burly of life as a cub reporter in a rambunctious, fast-moving city. It was a full and final end to everything he's known in his first 17 years, and the beginning of an adventure destined to make him one of the world's most famous figures. Kansas City was everything Ernest Hemingway had dared imagine it would be, a sprawling and fast-moving metropolis. It still boasted a frontier town atmosphere, thanks largely to its role as terminus for both the Santa Fe and Oregon cattle trails, and its position straddling both the Great Missouri River and the boundary that separates the states of Kansas and Missouri, all of which combine to make the city of a hectic and thriving port and marketplace for the vast agricultural riches amid which it nestled. Oil refining and heavy manufacturing industry would be added to make the cities first settled by French fur traders in 1821 and granted a town charter in 1889, an enervating place in which to be a young journalist hungry for experience. Destined to provide Hemingway with much material for later stories, Kansas City was also to prove a fabulous training ground thanks to the type of prose favored by the Kansas City Star, whose style handbook demanded short, precise sentences and paragraphs, precision, clarity, and immediacy from its writers. Described later by Hemingway as the best rules I ever learned for the business of writing, that particular style would form the foundation of all of his subsequent work. After a few weeks living with his uncle's family, which all too resembled life in Oak Park, Hemingway moved to share a small attic rented by Carl Edgar, an acquaintance he'd first met at Walloon Lake, fated like so many others to be portrayed in one of Hemingway's Nick Adams stories. Carl worked for a fuel oil company, paid $60 a month for his work on the Star. Hemingway's share of the rent, including 2 meals a day, was $35 a month. While not well off financially, Hemingway soon became rich in experience, thanks to him being given the short stop run, covering crime stories in the police station, the hospital, where he checked on accident deaths and the aftermath of violent crimes, and the railway station, another mine of good stories and contracts, and the occasional traveling celebrity. Developing a brash veneer in order to cover the polite reticence drummed into him during childhood, he liked nothing more than riding in police cars and ambulances as they raced through the city streets, although he often balked at asking interviewers for details he considered too personal. More interesting in writing features than hard news items, Hemingway was most proud of a piece called Mix War, Art and Dancing, which recounted the tale of a woman excluded from a society dance. It was left to the reader to work out that the woman was actually a prostitute. Hemingway only laid clues, omitting details deliberately in precisely the same way he would in later prose. A number of Hemingway stories for the Kansas City Star, many uncredited at the time but identified and reprinted later, a keen interest in the same subject which would later dominate his fiction: violence and heroism, death and suicide, crime and sport, especially boxing. It is no accident that several of those stories dealt with military recruitment, for he was growing ever more determined to catch some of the action in Europe before the war burned itself out. A new friendship with another star journalist, Ted Brumbach, only served to fix Hemingway's determination. Brumbach, a Kansas City judge's son, had been accepted by the American Field Service and had driven an ambulance in France from July until November 17th, despite having lost an eye in a golf accident. Already rejected by the U.S. military because of his own deceptive eyesight, Hemingway seized on this backdoor chance, the American Red Cross, in December, and to his delight was readily accepted. Let's stop here, and then we are gonna get more info. Hungry for War, Rudyard Kipling. I've heard of Rudyard Kipling. There's one creator online. I really like his stuff. His name is Rudyard, and the reason why I remember him is because his name is so unusual, but also that he, again, I listened to him for a little bit, and him talking about it, he said that he's named after this writer, that like his father's really into history and all that jazz. But anyways, Rudyard is most definitely not listening to my podcast right now, but if he is, I think it would be cool. I like his work. I enjoy his work. But Rudyard Kipling was also a major impact on Hemingway. We talked about some of the people and how his writing style, the way it's so short and there's so much one needs to allude to, the way that he works is just brilliant. And it does make sense, because if you're starting in the Star in like a journalistic sense, where you need to get information out to the public, but you need to do it quickly, and you do not have all the space to fit in as many words as you would like, writing in such a way as to leave the reader to fill in the blank is genius. It gets his point across when he was in a journalistic way, or him being in a journalistic environment, being in journalism at the time. But him carrying that over and just keeping it as his style is just interesting. Because Hemingway is not formally trained. He didn't go to college. Instead of going to college, he went straight to Missouri. He went straight to Kansas, and he began learning and doing. I truly do believe that doing is the fastest way we learn, and I think that that was a very good thing that happened, that he just ended up, being like, I know, I love the words, I love writing, so I'm just going to go and begin learning. And as we mentioned a little bit in there, Hemingway's parents wanted him to have a college degree or go and be a doctor like his father was, which back in that time, Victorian era, pretty much what's expected, especially of a boy who grew up in suburban, high, middle, definitely upper class kind of, environment. This is kind of the house that Hemingway, was first born in, because as we said, when Hemingway's parents married, they first lived with his grandpa on his mom's side. And Hemingway is named for his grandpa on his mom's side, which is probably the reason why. But this is a very modest house that kind of starting off in, all things considered, compared to where they would end up being one day. But Hemingway, the amount of sports that he played and all the activities he was able to do, he played an instrument because his mother forced him to. He played I would like to say cello. I think cello or violin, but I'm definitely certain it's cello. Fun fact about me, I played the alto saxophone. I know, isn't that like so me though? I would play the alto saxophone. And when I'm reading about things like this, it makes me want to go back to like learning an instrument. Does anybody else learn an instrument? I'm just kind of curious. But like he played all these sports, and he took a part in the school play. He played an instrument. He was in football. He did some water polo sports and swimming. I don't know how the boy found the time to do everything that he did. Perhaps he was just trying to, stay away from his many, siblings that he has, because he's one of 6 children. So for Hemingway, doing all those sports is probably a good way for him to be like, I got basketball practice. I've got swimming. I gotta go practice this instrument. You say, I wish I knew instruments. It's a cool talent. It is a very cool talent. It is difficult, everything is difficult. I wish I knew how to, be a better ice skater. There are certain sports I would like to get better at. But Hemingway, I don't know how he found the time. I played the alto saxophone. I was in field hockey, and I worked 30 hours a week at one of my part-time jobs. So, I don't know, I guess I was a busy child. So maybe compared to what he was doing, what I'm doing, kind of similar level. That you can imagine a kid just growing up doing a lot of sports. And part of it probably was his personality. But as a kid who grew up in a big family, I'm telling you, I worked to escape my siblings sometimes. I love my siblings, okay? They're awesome. It's fun to play with them. At the same time, there's no such thing as peace and quiet when you have 6 siblings, okay? There's no quiet. There's none whatsoever. So for me, being in sports, being in band, or working, means I was going to be around people anyways. So I might as well make money, or I might as well learn a new skill. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But the boy did a lot, and I really don't. But some of the figures that were influential on Hemingway: Rudyard Kipling over here. This is Rudyard Kipling, and this is O. Henry. O. Henry is also influential in the different things that he wrote, but they're different people as well. And he would read these authors to his children when his boys were growing up, which is amazing. How it's passed on, that his grandfather started him on these stories and started telling him about Theodore Roosevelt, and then he would just take that, run with it, and then eventually he would end up telling his sons about these stories, which is pretty cool. But Rudyard Kipling, I'm curious about him now. I want to know more about him. And then another writer at the time who had a major impact on Hemingway was Ring Lardner, an influential figure. Hemingway liked his snappy, colloquial style, which he and his cohorts copied to give the trapeze a distinctive voice. I would like to call it trapeze. I want to say trapeze, so I'm just going to say trapeze. But for this one, it makes sense. Who does Hemingway, where did Hemingway get his inspiration from? And we can ask, where did Rudyard Kipling get his inspiration from? Where did Shakespeare get his inspiration from? It can go on and on and on. Kipling's one of my faves. He had a scary upbringing, but he wrote fun children's stories. Oh, really? Is he? Huh. What can you give me a title or something? Because maybe we'll explore that towards the end, but that's fascinating. I know nothing about Kipling, but maybe it's because I'm a girl. If you're telling me scary stories, it must mean that you had stories of adventure and stories of bravery and overcoming the difficulty. But I would have never thought that Kipling would be a children's author. But yes, who influenced Hemingway? Kipling. O. Henry. Oh, the Jungle Book. Oh, nice. Okay, good one. Okay. That's perfect. Okay. I could see that. That's pretty cool. Don't hate me, but I've never seen the Jungle Book. Don't hate me, okay? I'm gonna go back to reading, so you can't even come at me, okay? I'm gonna go back to reading now. But the Jungle Book, I've never seen it. But I like stories like that. I like Disney and their original stories. So I think that would be up my alley. Hemingway, along with Ted Brumback, arrived in Paris during a bombardment from massive German guns based some 100 kilometers away near Amiens. This was an indiscriminate barrage born out of desperation as the Allies rebuffed Germany's last infantry offensive, and which only served to blow pieces of masonry about and force the city's citizens into underground shelters. Hemingway was not about to be driven undercover. Seizing the opportunity to wire a dramatic first-person story back to the Kansas City Star, he and Ted Brumback asked a taxi driver to take them to where shells were falling. After an hour, they had the thrill of seeing a German shell hit the front of the Madeleine Church, even if the damage was light. Ordered to take up his first posting in Milan, Hemingway had something of a baptism of fire. The day he arrived coincided with an explosion in a nearby munitions factory, and he found himself detailed to helping extinguish a fire which had spread to a field outside the compound, and carrying the mutilated bodies and dismembered limbs of workers to an improvised mortuary. He was horrified to discover that many of these were women. Moved on 2 days later to an ambulance unit based at Chio, about 60 kilometers east of Lake Garda, Hemingway spent the frustratingly boring weeks there, which were only enlivened by his writing a Ring Lardner parody for Chow, the unit's newspaper, and meeting John Dos Passos, the Harvard graduate son of a wealthy Chicago lawyer of Portuguese descent. Like Hemingway, Dos Passos was hunting thrills and spills as an ambulance driver. Unlike Hemingway, who would nevertheless become a good friend, he would recoil from the brutality he witnessed, finding no merit in conflict. Wanting to get closer to the real war, the point at which Italian and Austrian forces confronted each other, Hemingway volunteered to run a Red Cross canteen in northeast Italy on the Piave front. His initial frustration at being restricted to running a posto di ricovero, dispensing chocolate and cigarettes to the wounded and frontline soldiers, would be recalled vividly in the Nick Adams story, A Way You'll Never Be, and give Hemingway's alter ego a chance to rail at the indignity of being a token and strictly non-combatant Yankee in the midst of men who understandably, though mistakenly, took his presence as proof that American reinforcements were about to arrive. Hemingway got his glimpse of the reality of war at midnight on July 8, 1918, at Fossata di Piave. He was handing out comforts in a trench when an Austrian mortar shell, which is a crude oil drum-like device packed with explosive and scrap metal, exploded only a meter or so away, instantly killing the men who stood between him and the blast. Hemingway himself was severely wounded in the legs by flying shrapnel and knocked unconscious by the blast. When he came to, and despite having 237 separate wounds in his legs, managed to pick up and carry a badly wounded soldier from distance to a first aid post. It was then that he realized the extent of his own injuries and allowed himself to be placed on a stretcher before passing out again. It was only after he'd been carried 3 kilometers and waited 2 more hours in a stable for an ambulance that Hemingway was given morphine and tetanus shots before having almost 30 fragments removed from his legs. The pain must have been unbearable throughout. But his first own full account of the episodes, given in a letter to his family just over a month later, claimed that his injuries didn't hurt a bit at the time. Only my feet felt like I had rubber boots full of water on, hot water, and my kneecap was acting queer. We took off my trousers and the old limbs were still there, but gee, they were a mess. They couldn't figure out how I had walked 150 yards with a load with both knees shot through, and my right shoe punctured in 2 big places. However, not included in that letter home was Hemingway's later claim that he had also suffered 2 wounds to his scrotal sac and was forced to rest his thankfully intact testicles on a pillow once he was moved from a field hospital in Fornaci to a Red Cross base hospital in Milan. This claim is hard to reconcile with his account of making love with Agnes von Korowski, the Red Cross nurse assigned to look after the 18-year-old hero during his treatment and convalescence there, unless he was indeed a very fast healer. What was not in doubt is that mutilation or worse. What was not in doubt is that Hemingway would have found himself in the company of men who had suffered genital mutilation or worse, as ever their agony and the implications such injuries had for them in later life would provide grits for the Hemingway word mill. Although not explicitly described, it would be a similar wound which so blighted and scarred Jake Barnes in The Sun Also Rises, while Hemingway's own memories of the explosion, which almost claimed his life, would be used in almost precise details to describe the Fredericks Henry's experience in A Farewell to Arms. I know, I threw a lot at you right there. Wow. The scrotal sac is where my brain is kind of like, ooh, that's a lot. That's a lot of pain. It's interesting that war is so romanticized. Like we said, Hemingway's grandfather on his dad's side went to war, as well as on his mom's side. Mom's side was like, no. His grandpa on his mom's side was like, don't even talk to me about war. Don't talk to me about war in my house. Don't even mention war. That's how much he hated war. And then on the other side, his dad's side, is kind of like romanticizing war, telling his grandson all these cool stories and how awesome it is to go rush in battle and have adventures and kill tigers and lions. Oh my. But war is one of those things that I can understand through these books, through literature, it is so romanticized, and it is such a dream. And the influence that his grandfather must have had on him, I think, is understated. I really do. And him growing up and really wanting to go to war, and even when he was rejected, he found a back door and you know, got accepted into the ambulance corps to go to Italy and help out in the war. That is a desperation for adventure. It's kind of a desperation to escape his little perfect town that he was confined in. Oak Park is described as stuffy, picturesque, Bible thumping, and full of people who are holier than thou on the outside. Just like we had said a little bit about Hemingway's mother, the woman appears to be, from what I've read, the woman appears to be a selfish lady who grew up spoiled, and everything is about her. And the society that she grew up in, as long as everything looks good on the outside, that's what matters. And I'm sure some of you can relate that in your own life, perhaps you live in a neighborhood or you grew up with a mother who was obsessed with how everything looked on the outside, but on the inside, we wow, the picture, the stories that could be told. And I imagine Hemingway wanted to get away and run away as far as possible from the stifledness and like projecting an image of just perfection, while on the inside, everything being lived is just complete opposite. For a man, I especially understand wanting the adventure and wanting to get out there. Like for a man wanting to kill things and move around and be adventurous, that is 100%. Get it. It makes sense to me. But the other things that don't really make sense to me is why he hated his name so much. I have Hemingstein. You can see that in the picture up there. And I think he just didn't like the name Ernest. Maybe it was too old of a name. And, you know, fashion, and it didn't sound cool enough. I'm not sure. Or is it perhaps that, although he was named after his maternal grandfather, his hero was his dad's side, his grandfather on his dad's side. So, is it just that he didn't get along, and then he just didn't have an affection towards his grandfather? Or is it that he disliked his mom so much that it's just everything just got poisoned for him? It's just a lot to think about. A lot to think about. But the man is complicated, of course. But I kind of feel bad for him a little bit. You can kind of feel for Hemingway. He was dressed in girl clothes until he was 4. And then he was given a girl's haircut until he was 6. He wore boar shorts that were like, you know, I think England still does it. Like if you think of the princes and princesses, little George, you know, with his little shorts, like, very cute at like 10 years old. But like they stopped wearing these little tiny shorts at the knee at like around, I want to say 10. But Hemingway was wearing that kind of shorts like when he was 15. So it appears that although his mom wanted to dress him up as a girl and really, I don't know, she wanted to keep him in infancy forever. I'm not sure what her reasoning was, but it seems that like his first problems kind of begin with his mom denying who he is, him being a boy, A, and B, it appears as if his mom really never loved him in the way that he wasn't accepted for being born a boy. When he was being born a boy, it's as if his mom wanted a girl. And Hemingway, Ernest, would never be her favorite child. And it's just, I don't know, you can kind of begin to understand the resentment building up and how later on that would impact what he would carry on to his relationships with women. I'm going to leave you with that thought while we move on and get some more info down, because there are some interesting parts to get into with his relationship with women, which I am most certain you are aware how dysfunctional that was. Or, I don't know, we're about to get into it. Let me drink some water first, though, and then we'll continue. A farewell to arms. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna read a little bit more, and then we are going to get into. And then we're going to get into some talking points. Alrighty. I think I like this shirt color. I go back and forth with like different colors. Sometimes black is my favorite color. If you haven't noticed by now, black is my favorite color. It's so easy to wear. It goes with everything. And I'm not I'm a human, okay? I sweat, and black helps me out because just in case it's super duper hot, black usually saves me. But I like a cool color such as this one. It's like a rustic red, kind of, I think. But back to Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway was not the first young man, and definitely not the last, to fall head over heels in love with a beautiful nurse who guided him through the darkest days and nights of a slow recovery from serious injury. But his fixation with Agnes von Kurowski was to be all-consuming, and, when she finally declined to marry him, provide a rich source of inspiration, both for the bittersweet scenario of A Farewell to Arms and a character of Catherine Barclay, the English nurse doomed to die in childbirth after the affair with Frederick Henry, the young American lieutenant wounded, just as Hemingway had been in a service with the ambulance corps in Italy. Quite how all-consuming that fixation became was discovered in July 1961, after his suicide. Prominent among the documents and personal effects in Hemingway's study was a bundle of letters from Agnes. 40 years after she had jilted him, through 4 marriages, innumerable affairs, and countless addresses, Hemingway had preserved those fragmented memories of his first unconsummated and unrequited love. 7 years older than her patient, Agnes was born in Germantown, Pennsylvania, the daughter of a German-born father and an American mother from a distinguished military family. A fluent French speaker, Agnes had spent her early years on army posts in Vancouver and Alaska, and had also worked as a librarian in Washington, D.C. before training as a nurse in New York. Tall, slim, with chestnut hair and blue-gray eyes, she was characterized by Henry Villard, a fellow patient who would collect, edit, and publish her diaries in 1989 as easily the most scintillating of the nurses, cheerful, quick, sympathetic, with an almost mischievous sense of humor. Volunteering for night duty in order to spend more uninterrupted time with the big, good-looking patient, whom she would later describe as always in good spirits despite the severity of his wounds. Agnes was to find herself drawn inexorably to a quite remarkable and remarkably brave young man. She recalled how terrified that his doctors might decide to amputate his legs, and determined to eliminate any possible source of gangrene, Hemingway resorted to drastic measures. The first few days, he was using a penknife to dig out pieces of shrapnel. He was still doing it when he got home, he said in a letter. More ominously, especially considering Hemingway's later alcoholism and drink-related illnesses, Agnes also recalled that he drank brandy all the time. I think he slept very well. If he did sleep well, it was without Agnes, who vehemently denied and clearly resented all later assumptions that, as a character of Catherine Barclay was so clearly based on her and that of Frederick Henry so obviously based on Hemingway's dream of himself as a hero, they had been lovers in real life. Until her own death in 1984, Agnes would protest that while she loved Ernest Hemingway, she had never made love with him, that commitment was being saved, for when he returned to America, found himself a job, and sent for her, then they would be married, and only then would they sleep together. It did not, of course, happen that way. After Hemingway returned home, Agnes met and fell in love with Lieutenant Domenico Caracciolo, heir to Neapolitan dukedom, heir to a Neapolitan dukedom. Before she learned that his family would not permit marriage to a woman they viewed as no more than an upstart American gold digger, Agnes wrote Hemingway a curt, regretful letter which he, against drawing on life for his fiction, would refer to in his novella The Snows of Kilimanjaro. There, his central character, Harry, described the effect rejection by a former lover had had on him. He had written her, the first one, the one who left him, a letter telling her how he had been able to kill it. Sorry, let me repeat that one more time. He had written her, the first one, the one who left him, a letter telling her how he had never been able to kill it. His love, how everyone he had slept with only made him miss her more. How what she had done could never matter, since he knew he could not cure himself of loving her. If Harry was only articulating Hemingway's own deepest thoughts, they go a long way to explaining his repeated failure to sustain any of his 4 subsequent marriages and his many brief and inevitably stormy love affairs. Indelibly scared by Agnes's betrayal, he could never trust any woman completely and would cause all relationships to collapse beneath the weight of his paranoia. No matter how loving or loyal his women were, Hemingway's innate mistrust was calculated to drive them away. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. He would repeat time and again. War. All is fair in love and war. Is she an American upstart gold digger? Do we think she is that? Okay, let's take this into account. Okay, there's several things to take into account. But first, let's look at some pictures of Hemingway in Italy and the ambulance that he would drive and some of his pictures while he's in action. We're gonna talk and go through pictures at the same time. Hemingway has a thing for women who are older than him. This lady that he fell in love with, who was 7-8 years older than him, his first wife would be again 7-8 years older than him. I don't know. How psychological? How deep do we want to go psychologically? It is appearing as if Hemingway's mother truly messed him up. Aside from, the other ailments and going to war, but the 237 fragments as well. Losing his legs, trauma, and then his love, and then losing her. It's like he went through so much trauma in such a short period of time. It's as if he was broken. It's as if he can never be a regular man. Yes, he'll always be a great writer, but it appears that he failed at everything else. Can't really hold a job, I suppose. Never stable. Not really cared for by his children. And I don't know. Is there anything positive about this man other than his work? We're going to continue digging and see if there is, but I want to talk about war. I want to talk about war and how that could have impacted him. Clearly it impacted him. But I'm just I think he just idealized his grandfather so much that he just wanted to become a hero like him. I don't know. Because he got hit 237 fragments in his legs, and he really went to his superiors and found a way to ask them to let him go back and try to be in the line of fire again. Although he would omit this from his many interviews that he was doing when he first came back, later on, we have all the writings and collections of everything and records of everything, he never mentioned that he would realize that he was too ill and his legs could really not go on anymore. And he would just back away from that line after attempting to go back in such a situation after the fragments. Now, he was awarded very big medals, Italian Valor, Medal of Honor, and the highest order that you can get. Like we said, he had taken a guy that was next to him when he got hit with those fragments and moved him along, even with his legs in the shape that it was in. His kneecaps were basically blown to bits. He had 2 huge holes in his feet, in his shoes. 237 fragments. It sounds like that should have killed him. It sounds like he should not be walking, and it sounds like he should have ended up a cripple his entire life. But his determination and him learning about the doctors thinking about amputating his legs, he took out a penknife and began digging these fragments out of his own legs. In the story, when they first say that he was then given some tetanus shots and then he was put through and the doctors removed only like 30 fragments. So Hemingway removed the other 207 fragments himself, or pretty good amount of it, that he didn't end up losing any of his legs. It is a miracle that the man is walking, was able to walk after such an accident. And it's also is just his fighting spirit. He really is a fighter. But I never knew. Like, again, I've heard his writing is amazing. Yes, Ernest Hemingway is great. But I never knew that the man nearly lost his legs and that basically his legs got blown into bits. And again, we had a little bit of that writing when we read that like, yeah, I felt his letter home. He's like, I felt completely fine. It's just that, only it felt like I had rubber boots on and just water was pouring all over my legs. Just hot water. Wow. It's just crazy. But more pictures, cool pictures over here. Hemingway and the ladies. You can understand. We talked about how handsome this man is already, or in his youth, he's very handsome. We can understand how the man would end up with 5 wives, 4 divorces. That's impressive. It really is impressive. But the lady who broke his heart, right here, I know. We're going to leave her here and we're going to talk about her for a minute. Is she a gold digger? I think maybe she is. I really think, because at that time, a woman who's 7 years older, he's 18, I really do think she may have been a gold digger. Okay, the French thing though, like knowing that she came from a military background is pretty interesting. She did a bunch of different things. She worked as a librarian. She, was in New York for a period of time, got trained as a nurse, and then got sent over to France and help out. But I don't know. I mean, I've heard of the saying. What is the saying? I'm gonna look it up right now. I've heard of the saying that people fall in love with doctors or nurses when they're recovering. And I'm just typing this real quick because I'm really curious. I'm wondering if some parts of this wasn't just that a combination of, yeah, perhaps she was a tiny bit of a gold digger, and also that he's 18. This is the first woman he's come in contact with. Like, 20-something-year-old women, apparently have a certain power of persuasion, and I think that he may have just fallen underneath that kind of power. I wish I had gold diggers coming after me. You're so funny. Oh my gosh. What? It's so crazy. I know you're joking. I know you're joking. Um, but that makes me laugh. I wish I had gold diggers coming after me. Oh man. Do you think a gold digger would ever come after a woman? That's so funny. I mean, it does happen. Yeah, gold diggers are both both genders can be, but that's funny. Um, why does it so a medical context maybe you can see what I'm going up in here, but medical context, when a patient develops romantic or sexual feelings for their doctor or nurse during recovery, the term for this is typically referred to as transference. Okay, alrighty, bear with me. Here is my interpretation and my weird. So, like we said, conference, right? Is that what we agreed with? Sorry, transference. Transference. Phenomenon where a person redirects feelings and desires from important figures in their past, such as a partner or former partners, onto someone in their current life. Okay. So it can be used in different contexts, but primarily with doctors and nurses, referred to as transference, where they fall in love and develop romantic feelings for such people. And it makes sense. Yes, Hemingway grew up in a privilege. He grew up and he had a privileged life. But like we said, it appears that his mom favored his older sister. So I don't think his mom really ever loved him or showed him affection as a good mother typically does. I'm going to put it there. I'm not going to go in the can of worms of good mothers, okay? Whew, that's a can of worms. But this woman, 6 years, 7 years older than him. So in a way, kind of, she's elevated. You can understand like kind of like a maternal kind of connection a tiny bit. But he's an 18-year-old kid still. Yes, he's a man, but he's still very much a kid. He gets really, really badly hurt. Like, could die, could lose major limbs, impact his life forever. This nurse, very lively, spirited, speaks French fluently from his native country, and he's able to form a connection with her. Who wouldn't fall in love with such a person in such a situation? To go further into it, she would spend more time with him and change her duty to spend time with him at night and take care of him. And she, very understanding, she's a nurse. Her job is to take care of these men, make sure they survive, but also comfort them. To me, from what I'm reading, it doesn't appear that Hemingway's mother was one that was doting on her children or loved them in such a way. An unconditional love almost. That like, perhaps she praised her children when they did well in school or when they had good grades or when they did activities that she approved of, but just getting her child through the night because they're sick, now that's probably something that the nurse would have done, or any other chore in the house that the woman was rich enough that the housemaid could have cleaned and the nurse would have taken care of Hemingway, and the cook would have made sure that all his food is ready to go. So that maternal connection, that, unconditional love, I don't think was ever fulfilled for Hemingway, even though he grew up in a world of wealth and opulence. I think sometimes I feel bad for rich kids for that reason alone. Yeah, he had all the money. Yeah, he had so many extracurricular activities and he could go to a lake 3 months a year. But his mom didn't love him or really care for him. And as such, even with everything that he has, the man still ends up turning into a complete mess. All because his mommy didn't love him. How many villains do we have, starting with that? His mom didn't love him, so all of that, the transference. Yes, it was a bit happening with patient and, caretaker, but I could understand how he could transfer all of those feelings, all those, like, the things that he didn't get from his mom, and he got it from another woman who was older. I don't know, psychology over here. We are just speculating. But I think this lady, I think she was a bit of a gold digger, though. I really do. Because here's the thing. At that time, 7 years older, 24, 25, she's a very good looking lady, especially how they describe her, but also she speaks two languages. I'm assuming she's from America, born in America, traveling kid, so all over the place. And it appears probably the French came about when she was in Canada. So, well spoken, articulate, educated, beautiful, blue eyes, black hair, very beautiful woman. She should have been married at 21, especially for that time frame. Back then, like, women got married at 18. So yes, perhaps she was a gold digger. And I think that her writing this letters and, like, being with him and, like, pouring her heart out to him all the time, and them being together and having everything planned that once he gets a job in America, they're gonna come together and meet up and all that stuff. Well, that's a different can of worms. But you're so in love, and all of a sudden you meet another officer or a man of higher rank, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm sorry, I can't be in love with you anymore. Bye. I'll see you later. I, I think this is kind of right. Like, even like the 7 year difference to prey on a man who's like 18 years old. This makes me think of Candace and her Macron thing that's going on. Don't. But look it up. She's right in your face. She'll let you know. But anyways, a woman 7 years older than like 18. That's a pivotal age. I couldn't. Me, my conscience, at the age I am right now, similar like viewpoint. Being with a guy who's like 18, 19 years old, that's just inappropriate. And also, you are a caretaker. And it should have been, or at least back then, I think it is understood that these guys you're taking care of, they are vulnerable. They're wounded. They need your help. So you taking advantage and taking hostage of them emotionally is the most unethical thing you could do as a nurse. So, yeah, I think she's a bit of a predator, a bit of a gold digger. I can't understand how it could not be, because all the evidence points to that is in fact the truth. And also, I think it is absolutely, horrible thing to do. And I think war is just one of those things that brings so much to the surface. It destroys so many people. But it makes me curious about what his two grandfathers had witnessed. One grandfather was like, I don't even want to talk about it. Another grandfather glorified it. So it really is dependent on where they were stationed, what their luck was, and what they were doing in the military. I think in the military, sometimes you are lucky in where and when and what position you are posted in. I think it makes a difference of whether or not you get blown up, or you get all your limbs, destroyed. And things that come to the surface, and the emotions, the recovery, the scrotum surgery. Oh my gosh. They were talking about, yeah, Hemingway probably was in a room where he was with men who had experienced far worse things with what he had done, with what he had experienced, in terms of, yeah, his legs are severely messed up, and he's never gonna walk upright again. But do we ever think about the men who do get their scrotum blown off? About procreation? Like, I don't think we ever think about that. That war could actually take that decision away from men of whether or not they want to have a kid one day. I never thought about that. The romanticism of war. You never think about that. I want to show you a clip, which is in Game of Thrones. If you're obsessed with Game of Thrones, put it down below, okay? Because I am obsessed with Game of Thrones. I'm gonna look up the scene right now. But I mean, of course, any of you guys who are aware or you've lived a little bit, you've probably heard of all these stories. But it's just, in some ways though, I still feel bad for boys that the whole thing of like the adventure of war and everything is super cool. But they never talk about how, yeah, everything else you lose. And the drinking. The drinking started when he got his legs blown up. And then from then on, yeah, you start drinking to just get away from the pain. You start drinking just to get through the day and survive. And when you're in a good spirit, drinking amplifies that. But when you're feeling down, and when you are not doing so hot, and when you're feeling vulnerable or, insecure, drinking amplifies that. So the constant drinking that started and the good spirits that he was in when in his youth, it is interesting to see how that will play out later and how that will hurt everyone around him, especially the women who would come into his life. But man, it's crazy. And I feel bad. I really do feel bad for men in that regard. And so many of these wars, though, are not necessary. They're not necessary. It's just a matter of people wanting resources and fighting over it, and young men losing their lives. I've heard the saying, right? Young men go to war to fight each other on the behalf of old men whom they do not know and they have no gripe with. Do you think drinking should be banned? Absolutely not. Drinking should not be banned. Drinking is a genie that will never be put back in the bottle. I think that, like everything else, it really leads back to free will. I try to use God as a compass to explain everything. And everything in the world leads back to free will. Why do we have war? Because of free will. That's it. We humans get to make a choice of what we want to do. And other people trying to impose their will upon us is just, it doesn't work out. It has never worked out. It will never work out. But people still continue to try. And as such, these actions come into being. I don't think drinking is bad. I think that, just like I mentioned in the very beginning, that Hemingway's mother really didn't love him. If anything, she tried to turn him into a girl who she really wanted. So, I think not being loved is the problem. I don't think drinking is a problem. I think the inability for the one person in the world who brought you into this world to love you, if that's not there, that's going to shatter your world. A baby doesn't understand that them not being wanted is not about them. It's not their fault. But the trauma gets passed on. It gets passed on. And you would think like it leads back to love. As a kid, he really wasn't loved, and then that carried on. And then he would get into certain interactions or be in certain situations, and that would amplify. The more hurt he got physically, the more ailments he had to contend with, the more all of those latent feelings will come to the surface. So no drinking, no. If anything, I think we should legalize more or other substances that could help people in terms of like mental ability, especially with war. I have heard a lot about like men who were in war and taking like um, DMT or those very weird ones you've never heard of that are classified as like crazy drugs, but in reality are used for medicinal purposes. Again, under the right circumstances, being supervised and taking precaution and going to a professional, all that jazz. I'm not saying recreational like crazy, but like there are certain drugs that could help people that are not available. And then there's alcohol, which is available, widely available, and does a decent amount of damage. But we we already went through the prohibition, okay? We went through prohibition era. Alcohol is never going away. Um, and we like Fridays, so. But have you ever heard the saying that like we worship, we have a place of worship for alcohol? It's called bars. It's called bars. Oh man. What's his name again? A Game of Thrones scene where oh my gosh. Hey, who's you think it's possible to overcome a bad upbringing? Oh man. It is possible, but I think it takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of pain to discover that one even needs to improve from where they came from. Hemingway's getting to me, and I'm sorry I'm talking in such a manner, but that's the best I can give you. It takes time. But do you know who the person is who is the imp's bodyguard? Who is the imp's bodyguard again? Or where the oh man, guys, oh yeah, it's officially 8 p.m. so we're just having fun and chillaxing, and I want to get to this point of I really want to get this guy. What's his name? Oh my goodness. Game of Thrones. It's a Game of Thrones character, and he's the guy who saves the imp. Okay. Yeah, but we're just chilling out, chillaxing for a moment, and I'm trying to look up the scenes. But no, I think, but also in terms of what you mentioned about the kids thing and the upbringing, we didn't have this technology. We simply didn't. I think that's why education is so important and why knowledge should be preserved and cared for and really, you know, proliferate. I think it should because knowing and understanding these things, or not even, you don't even have to get into psychology. You don't even really need to get into psychology because I know people are annoyed that like they keep being categorized and everything. But if you could just think about it that like, hey, on my personal level at least, I could think of it that if I understand that my parents are also human and they went through some things that were difficult, even understanding that little bit and having some grace and being like, I feel bad for my parents and what they had to go through. Because although I've had my own troubles, my parents must have had their own troubles for them to be the way that they are. If that makes sense. So it's not even that you need to be aware of psychology, it's just that having some grace and stopping to think outside of yourself and be like, yes, my life is hard. And yes, I've gone through some things. But what about the people before me? And that is why I love history. Because history gives me perspective of what I'm going through today is so much better than what my ancestors had gone through. So much better than what was available at that time. Okay, I think I found it. Okay, I'm gonna see real quick if that is correct, and then I'm gonna play it if that is that. I feel like almost every problem today is caused by lack of compassion. Hmm, I concur with that point of view. I concur. And to add on to that, to add further on to that, would be to say that yes, and why are those people unable to feel compassionate? Is it because they have more pressing matters going on? They are unable to even stop for a moment? Is it because their lives are so painful that they themselves can't comprehend or think beyond themselves? Or is it just that they are the problem? They are the psychopath, they are the selfish person, and they are the person that does cause the problem. It's so interesting to think. But yeah, I agree with you that if we had more compassion, we'd be able to solve so many more problems in the world. But I think it's a beautiful thing about technology is that we will be able to reach more people who are but think like us. I am on here because I want to have conversations with people who are of similar mind and think in such a way, and so we can have an environment and genuinely enjoy discussing such topics. They do not need to look like me. If anything, I prefer that people are of different, race and color than I am, because I truly want to connect with different types of people and want to know more about their culture, about what makes them who they are. And I think that once we can better understanding where each other are coming from, or at least our culture or different people's culture, I think we're going to be better able to communicate and move forward in the future. It's going to take a lot of time, just like it took America a lot of time to become one country. I think it's going to take a lot of time for us humans to finally understand we are on this planet together. We're stuck here together. Okay? If this planet goes down, we all go down. So how about we try and keep it alive for the sake of everyone? That's really what I would think. But you guys, oh, spears and shields. I'm just I'm just obsessed with Game of Thrones, so huh. Okay. We're gonna watch this because it's just funny. But there's a specific part I wanted to tell you about that, like, you know, the bodyguard is kind of talking to this young man, this young lord, and he's like, I'm excited for battle. I'm ready to fight. And this seasoned veteran is like, have you fought before? He's like, no. He's like, okay, cool. Then he starts talking about how men shit themselves and how fire is all over the place and dysentery and how people cry for their mummies when they truly realize the horrors of war and actually are in battle. But I'll give you some narration while we fight. The Dothraki, of course. So we're gonna end on a upbeat note, but it's gonna be war, okay? Because war is it's crazy. We don't want it in real life, but it's pretty on screen. It looks pretty on screen. Oh my gosh. Ah! Dragons. The mother of dragons. So this is me having fun and going on with the war theme of Hemingway. But oof. That's a young man he was talking to about, hey, this is war. This, the burning, the shock, the fire, the smoke. Smoke will actually kill you faster than fire. Interesting fact. Or if there is a burning building, crawl, Do not stand up. Whoa. Ugh. But I can see why this is sexy. I really can. Like, it's just sheer might and force and blood and gore and just brilliant. Like, athleticism. Like, I get, like, as a kid hearing such stories, I get it. Wow. Oh my gosh. And of course, one of the most important things about war, supply. And you know, to go on top of this real quick, one thing I forgot to think about, or it really escaped me, is that you forget that ambulances are needed. That we need to take men from the battlefield after they've fallen and bring them to recuperate and bring them to safety and you know, patch them back up. I would have never thought about that. Or all the grain you need, all the food you need to supply these men and feed them and keep the, you know, their energy up. You can't keep these guys on just, you know, grain and, you know, carbohydrates and they'll be okay. They do truly need protein. They need meat. So war does a lot. It does a lot. But that's how Hemingway got in, was because he wanted to, he got in by being an ambulance driver, saw a bit of war, kind of was like a dancing monkey in a little bit, kind of like a dancing monkey in a suit, you know, show up, hand out chocolates. But his job is very important, even though he doesn't see it as being very important to those men who believe that he would become, that more American reinforcements were coming to rescue them or make it lighter load, and you know, you could fight together as like brothers. The spirit and hope is more important than the body, I believe, in my opinion, especially with war. So him being there provided value. He helped people. He did something good. And I think it's a perfect place to stop. It's been fun talking with you guys. I've enjoyed this way and our little chat for this one. Of course, I will see you tomorrow and we'll do more Hemingway. So, au revoir, à demain, à semaine prochaine.